So we're going to take a look at how South Africa stands to benefit with such partnerships in addressing its economic and social security status. To unpack this, we're going to be joined by teams by economic and social security expert from Wits School of Governance, Professor Alex van den Heever. Prof, good afternoon, and thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon.
Perhaps you could speak to South Africa's economic status, the impact that it's had on its citizens, and how at this point the summit can strengthen the bloc's partnership, how South Africa's chair could obviously benefit from this, even the global south for that matter.
Yeah, so South Africa hasn't done well on both economic growth and in socioeconomic and improving its socioeconomic status. On both those scores, they interrelate, they interact, but we've been very poor. And a large part of that has been on the supply side of the economy, where we have not done well. Infrastructure has, in many cases, public infrastructure and important components of the system of our systems of infrastructure, transport, our network industries, etc., have largely, in many cases, arguably collapsed, with detrimental effects for our economic growth potential. On the social protection side, South Africa, I was part of the Taylor Committee of Inquiry into Social Security, and that finished in 2002. From that period, South Africa has implemented virtually no structural social security programs of any substance, only enhancements in certain social grants. So we're far behind on what we are meant to do to improve our status. In terms of the impact that we could get from the other countries, some of these countries are, such as China, are very good at infrastructure. South Africa was very good at infrastructure and shouldn't be facing such failures at this point in time. It's a question as to whether or not our overall framework for procurement is collapsed, not our expertise. But as we continue on this vein, we are going to really struggle to achieve any kind of serious economic impetus. But I'm not sure that we can borrow that kind of expertise and capability from other countries when we're not actually able to procure and drive infrastructural programs in South Africa.
Let me bring in the issue of unemployment, which, as we know, is still very high in the country, and the importance of finding ways to generate economic growth so that we can create jobs. I want to look at the new development bank, which was established back in 2015 by BRICS members, and how it can provide financial support to emerging markets, how it could also help us with the unemployment crisis at large.
It could. So the question is whether our key weakness is access to capital. What it appears in South Africa is not the access to capital as such, in other words, financing, but the actual follow through on development projects. So we are, as I said, we're sitting with railway systems that have shut down, with power stations that are operating at between 50 and 60% of their potential. We've got new power and energy projects that are not taking off. All of those are quite key to our economic growth potential. And essentially, if those don't change, we are going to struggle to get economic growth and employment to emerge, because employment does require that a degree of economic growth does happen. The inclusiveness of growth depends on whether or not we have institutionalized a coherent system of social security. If we don't have that, then we also entrench. Even as we grow, we segment large parts of the population into systems and structures of inequality. We create it. So economic growth on itself can eliminate poverty, but if you don't have effective distributive systems in place, a lot of people end up being excluded from the benefits of that growth. So we've got to do two things. We've got to basically eliminate the obstructions to growth, and we have to make sure that we're distributing income adequately in South Africa. At the moment, we're not doing either properly. And the question is really whether the investments from the BRICS Bank will make a difference to that if we're not able to deploy our finances effectively, even when we have them.
So beyond that, what about managing perceptions to drive investor confidence? How is this summit going to enable that? And, how should South Africa at this point then be positioning itself to ensure that there are meaningful engagements, meaningful investments, economic growth, and ultimately development of the country?
Yeah, so there's two types of investment that are important. Private investment will depend on whether or not people have confidence in South Africa as a growth market. And so people are holding back at this point. So even companies, domestic companies that have significant surplus savings are not necessarily deploying them in South Africa. They're holding back because of uncertainty. And what they're looking at is, things like load shedding. They're looking at our rail system that can't transport goods to harbors. That's actually quite important. So if you're looking at investing in manufacturing in South Africa, you're actually going to be really concerned. If you're investing in mining and you can't be sure that you can use anything other than trucks to get to Richards Bay, you've got a problem. So we've got to get those things right. Now, at this point in time, if private investors need results. I'm not sure that they're going to go on promises. They need results, and we're not seeing them at the moment. So out of the BRICS process, the question is really whether something concrete can happen. And we, out of a period of history where we've actually seen the opposite, nothing happening. So we need something concrete to happen. And that will drive private investors. So if we see that public investment is actually working and achieving results, private investment will follow. And therefore we really need to understand that that's the way to capture the private investment. And confidence will come from results now. People aren't going to work on promises.
No, absolutely. I think in conclusion, perhaps we could look at what the BRICS grouping to date has achieved and what hangs on the back of this 15th edition of the summit.
Yes, I'm not sure that the BRICS process itself has achieved a great deal for South Africa and the region. What it's done is it's created a conversation about a sort of a multipolar world, but it hasn't necessarily delivered concrete results for the relevant countries. They're quite different. India and China are competing countries. They're not necessarily buddies. And Russia has its own agenda, which is pretty obscure and scary. And they all have different capabilities. Our interest would be more in countries such as India and China out of this group than Brazil or Russia, who have really no real economic, interests between us. Although there could be, but we don't really have very significant partner.
All right, Prof. Thank you for your time.
Partnerships. But India is, yeah.
No, so do continue your last point there.
No, it's just there's potential there. We've got to develop them. But China and India are different. But there are things we can get there, but not necessarily from the other two.
Prof, thank you for your time with us on the SABC. For those sentiments, Professor Alex van den Heever is an economics and social security expert from Wits School of Governance weighing in. As we edge closer to the BRICS Summit taking place between the 22nd and the 24th of August, really just looking at what South Africa stands to benefit with such partnerships in addressing its economic and social security status at large. Again, thanks to Prof Alex for his time with us here.